Good morning. Happy NISAW. Welcome to day 5 of the National Invasive Species Awareness Week here in 2025. Our theme for this year's event is enhancing North American biosecurity to protect against invasive species. My name is Christy Trifone Millhouse, the Executive Director here at the North American Invasive Species Management Association, also known as NISAW. And before we get started today, a few housekeeping notes. We're excited to have so many folks with us. Share with us in the chat where you're joining us from. Also, after presentation today, please feel free to use the reaction button to let our presenter know that you enjoyed the topic. We will be hosting a very brief Q&A today. We do have webinars back to back for most of the day, so we will keep to our 1 hour. But please feel free to enter a question in the Q&A box and not in the chat. NISAW is an international event powered by NISAW to raise awareness about invasive species, the threat they pose, and what can be done to prevent their spread. NISAW provides a platform for individuals from local, state, federal, tribal agencies, regional organizations, private industry, and citizens to discuss legislation, policies, resources, and improvements that can be made with our elected officials and decision makers. This is a week not only for learning, but for action. Throughout the week, we'll be sharing links with you in an effort to connect you with your U.S. senators and House representatives. I'm sure most of you have seen those links, have taken action, but we want our representatives to hear our collective voice and to learn about the importance of our work and why we need support and funding to continue to press forward. For those who want to still take an active role in this week's events, please head to NISAW.org. Find the NISAW toolkit filled with template posts, social media posts, press releases, PSAs, and more. And if you're not currently connected to us on socials, please go out and find us and share. We've had quite a week for NISAW, as you can see here from the agenda. And most of our presentations have really laser focused on our theme of enhancing biosecurity at all levels. Our presentations yesterday highlighted the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their national efforts related to biosecurity. I encourage you to visit our website to register for the last remaining events we have today. And if you were not able to attend some of our events this week, we'll be posting presentations to our YouTube channel after the event. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that our agenda changed quite a bit over this last month and certainly over this last week. And appreciate all your patience during this time. I'd like to take a moment to thank those federal employees who have invested time, talent, energy, and heart into this work. Some of you are no longer with those efforts, while others are still holding strong. NISAW is driven by education and action, as I mentioned. And as a partner, we recognize that now is not the time to take a step back and sit down, but rather to stand up and move forward together. I encourage you to activate your networks behind our calls to action and to provide support to programs and partners in your area that need a bit of glue right now. Through partnership and collaboration, we are stronger. And this is really the essence of our work here at NISAW. As leaders of NISAW is deeply vested in our mission to empower invasive species management in North America. We are led by an 18-member board of leading experts and professionals with supporting committees that I encourage all of you to consider joining. We have a strong NISAW team and a membership that continues to grow in numbers by the day. NISAW is one of our most far-reaching events with over 2.9 million people participating last year. Here at NISAW, we provide the connections, tools, and voice that you need to address invasive species. We frame our programming around these 3 core pillars. We work hard to provide opportunities for collaboration and connections through webinars, summits, and our annual conference. We equipped our membership and those in the invasive species community with the tools needed to manage and educate the public about invasive species. And finally, we strive to provide a collective voice on a national platform to advocate for relevance and support through our government relations programming and events like NISAW. Some of our upcoming events you won't want to miss include the 2025 National Forum on Biological Control in Annapolis from April 14th through the 17th. The meeting themes will revolve around biocontrol research, management, and impacts on natural areas. And we've got some great speakers lined up to encourage you to register today if you're interested in this in-person networking opportunity with our folks from the biocontrol community. Another event you will surely not want to miss is our 2025 NISMA Annual Conference. Mark your calendars and plan to join us in Lake Tahoe from November 3rd through the 6th. Our theme this year is charting a new course, and we've got some great speakers lined up for this event as well, and hope to see you all there. Head to NISMA.org. Registration is open. One of the ways that we creatively fund our mission-driven work is through our NISMA shop. This week, we're hosting a special on our handheld boot brushes, and I encourage you all to head to the shop to get these brushes. There are other tools there that you might be interested in purchasing, and each purchase goes right back into our mission to make events like today possible. As a friendly reminder, your membership helps to make our mission come to life as well. If you're not currently a member, we offer a variety of different membership options that are new this year. So go ahead and check out our new membership structure. And again, if you're not a member, we encourage you to join us. Want to be a sponsor in a bigger way? Our new Premier Partner program is designed for you. Our Premier Partners enjoy benefits throughout the year, including acknowledgement on our website, at events, and more. And you can see here our 2025 current Premier Partners. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of them for their generous support that's made today and this week, and many other events here at NISMA possible. So thanks to our 2025 Premier Partners. Okay, it's now time for the main event. I'd like to introduce NISMA's Government Relations Manager, Mara Cunningham, who will be moderating our webinar today. Take it away, Mara.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. As Christy said, I'm Mara Cunningham. I'm NISMA's Government Relations Manager. I will be helping moderate today's session on the new World Screwworm, preparing for a U.S. domestic response. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Denise Bonilla, who is a National Cattle Fever Tick Eradication Program Coordinator and Veterinary Services Entomologist for USDA APHIS. Denise, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you. I wanted to come on and say hi for a minute. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I'm Denise Bonilla. I'm an entomologist with USDA APHIS Veterinary Services. And again, happy to tell you a little bit about what we're doing these days, getting ready for a potential incursion of screwworm here in the United States. So with that, let's get going. This is our little screwworm coming to say hi. And he's going to tell you a little bit today about his biology. We're going to look at some infestations just so you can see what they look like. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the current outbreak in Central America and the distribution of what's going on there. And then probably what you really want to know is what happens if I see screwworm? What do I do? We're going to follow that up with some outreach materials that are available and how to find those. So here's our introduction. So screwworm, we say screwworm, and I just showed you a maggot, which gives you an idea that this is a fly we're dealing with. So Cochleomyia omnivorax, which actually omnivorax means man-eater. And the reason why it's a man-eater is that the larval fly or maggot feeds on the living tissue of warm-blooded animals. Now, that's important in that, of course, for animal and public health, but this is really one of the very few flies that will only feed on living tissue. So you've got other flies out there that'll feed on dead tissue and living tissue, but this will only feed on living tissue. And so warm-blooded animals, of course, livestock, domestic animals, humans, and actually birds too, on top of that. So besides the animal and public health implications of this myiasis, which is the feeding of basically larval flies on tissue, is this economic impact. So this gives you an idea here. We've got a report you can download on the web if you use this QR code. But this is a snippet from this analysis, economic analysis. We used to have screwworm, and indeed, one of the last outbreaks we had was in Texas in 1976. So if you took that outbreak of 7 million cattle infested at a 20% infestation rate, and you blew it up into today's world in Texas, you can see that the losses to Texas producers is millions and millions of dollars. And then on top of that, the loss to the general Texas economy is even more. So this is a big deal for our agriculture. A little bit about the biology. So this is our life cycle, and this is going to come into play when we think about control of this pest. We've got screwworm adults, females and males up here. And it's important to note for later when we start talking about sterile fly release that the male will basically copulate with several females, but the female only mates once in its lifetime. And so keep that in mind when we talk more about sterile flies later. So we've got a female and it's ready to lay eggs. It finds a wound or an orifice on a warm-blooded animal or a bird, lays eggs on the edge. The eggs will hatch in 12 to 24 hours. They go into the wound, and then they have 3 instars, so they get larger. At this 3rd instar, they will drop from the wound, and they will either burrow into the ground or find a safe area if they can't do that, and they'll pupate. The pupate will be there for a few days and emerge into a fly, which will come out of the pupal case and dry itself out and pump itself up and be ready to go and find more screwworm flies. Now, this is all dependent on the weather. So humidity, temperature, different types of environmental cues. But the take-home message here is that this entire cycle, if the temperature, if everything's just right, can go as fast as 3 weeks, 21 days. So animal transmission. So that may be a misnomer somewhat because you might take that as animal-to-animal transmission, and that just doesn't happen. You can't actually give screwworm from one animal to another animal. However, the fly is really important in transmitting to animals. The female fly comes in, drops those shingled egg masses onto the side of the wound, which you can see here. And that wound doesn't have to be a large wound. It can be as small as a tick bite. It also doesn't have to be a wound. We see a lot of people who actually have infestations. They have infestations in their nose and in areas where there's mucous membranes, so thin skin. For animals, we worry about other things like the genitalia, the umbilicus. And again, living tissue is important for this species. That makes it different than other flies. However, once that fly starts feeding on the wound, it makes that wound nice and stinky and perfect for, basically, it's like calling out to the other flies. So more screwworms come in, other types of flies come in, and so you can have multiple infestations in one wound. So multiple species in one spot. Now, this is a picture of actually a dog that we saw in our last US outbreak, which happened in 2016, 2017 in Florida in the Keys. This dog was actually on the mainland, and this is a severe case of screwworm infestation. You can see the larvae in the wound here, and these are all probably third instar larvae. At first and second instar, they're hard to see in the wound. You might see something moving around. There can be a few, but there's usually hundreds of them present at this point. And these wounds will have bloody discharge. You'll probably smell them before you ever see them. It smells awful. And again, it can be a small wound, but it can be really deep. So the entrance is really small, but the wound can be quite large underneath. And you can imagine that with something like this, that the animals don't feel good. They're depressed, they won't feed, and they'll do anything to make themselves feel better. Maybe they shake their heads, they move away from the rest of the animals. They will stand in water, they'll rub on fences. Again, anything to try to feel better, because this is just horrible. And indeed it is horrible, because it depends on what type of animal, where they're infested. But most animals get very sick from this. And even if you get rid of the maggots or the larvae, there's secondary bacterial infections that can actually kill the animal in the wound. Now, if you find it early, there are parasiticides that can be used to kill off the larvae or the maggots. But if you don't find it, it's usually fatal in a week to 2 weeks. And if you have newborns in an area, the umbilicus is really a perfect spot for these flies, and the newborns just can't live through this. So hopefully none of you ate your breakfast recently. I'm going to show you just the horrible extent of what this can look like. These are all pictures, again, from the outbreak in 2016, 2017 in the key deer in Florida in the Keys. It was actually part of the reason this was so bad is it was rutting season for these deer. So they had these fresh wounds, and you can see the flies coming up to the wound here on this deer. This picture is interesting because you can see actually almost all, everything but the pupal stage here. So you've got eggs on the edge of the wound. You've got the flies coming in, and you can see actually the maggots peeking over the edge of the wound. Another photo of the flies and the maggots coming in. They in some cases in these deer, they ate right down to the skull. And in this one, you can see if you look back behind the antlers, you can see the larvae back all the way at the edge of the skull. Now, in Panama right now, again, we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but they're seeing, these are the top 10 conditions that give you an idea of how myiasis might happen. So again, I talked about the umbilicus. We don't have vampire bats so much to worry about, thank goodness. But all these other things that could be an issue, ear tags, dog bites, tick bites, can create spots for infestation. So let's talk again about this current outbreak that's happening. I mentioned earlier to you guys that we used to have screwworm here in the United States. And indeed, it took a long time to eradicate, but we were able to, through a lot of cooperative work and sterile insect release and quarantine and movement controls, push this screwworm all the way back into Central America and all the way back to South America, to this area called the Darien Gap. Now, the Darien Gap is a wild area right on the edge of Colombia, where Colombia is still, screwworm is still endemic there. In Pecora, Panama, we've got a facility, our COPEG facility, which is where we have produced sterile flies for release in the Darien Gap since 2006, and it's been working just fine. However, this past few years, we saw that Panama declared an emergency back in August 2022, that the screwworms were just getting out of control. They were far out of the Darien Gap into Panama. We were able to release funding for a response in December 2023. And then we started officially having our outbreak response led by our international services in July 2023 for Panama and Costa Rica, which were infested. I want you guys just to look at these numbers. Basically, every Central American country at this point and Mexico is infested. And we worry the most about Mexico here, which has seen a spike in cases in the last few weeks because it's birthing season in Mexico. And they're right now, and you can see the southern Mexico, or just in southern Mexico, but in the last few weeks, we've added 2 Mexican states. So they're in Chiapas, Quintana Roo, Tabasco, and Campeche at this point, and we're worried about them coming even further north. So a little bit more about COPEG. So COPEG is translated to the Commission for the Eradication and Prevention of Screwworm, and it's a U.S. Panama Cooperative Agreement facility. And so they have Panamanians working there alongside our U.S. employees, producing screwworms and doing screwworm research. And they have this great network in Panama that they put these flies out, and they will take the flies that they produce there and put them to the 2 dispersal centers. The ones that we had before this outbreak got really bad were in out of Panama here in the Tocumen International Airport. But then we added Palmarella, Honduras, and we added 2 more dispersal centers in Tapachula, Mexico, and Tuxtla, Mexico, which are in Chiapas. And the reason that's important is that you would imagine that when you want to put flies out, these sterile flies that are going to stop basically this population, this wild population of flies, that you want the freshest flies possible to be fit when they are released. And they're released from 2 ways. They're released from the air as adults, and they're released from the ground. The pupae are put in chambers and are allowed to release from the ground. So especially this aerial dispersal, you want these dispersal centers are important because they are basically a stop so that they can refresh and not spend all the time on the plane. So this is super important. And these 2 centers down here are potential production centers at this point that Mexico is working on, whether we can get some more production of sterile flies in Mexico. This is what sterile fly looks like. Again, these females only mate once per life, and this is what it looks like in the production facility that's manned 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to keep these flies alive. And they're subjected to radiation, and that is how they are become sterile. At the COPEG plant, before this all started, they were putting about 20 to 50 million out a week to maintain that barrier zone. Now they're at capacity at over 100 million a week. And then we have flight grids where these flies are being released aerially. There's 26 flights a week, dependent on the weather. And I showed you how that shift was going north of the positives. We continue to move that flight grid around strategically to stop the northern spread of these flies and reestablish a barrier. And right now the goal is to reestablish a barrier at that isthmus in Mexico, to keep the flies south of that and then push back down. I need to just be sure to make a point here that Sterile flies are really important, but they aren't the only thing. They have to be worked into an integrated pest management program. And that's important to pull all these other pieces in. And that's making sure that regulatory controls are in place, to be sure that quarantine practices are in place, that animal control inspection checkpoints are in place. And there's a lot of education that goes along with this. So teaching people that what screwworm looks like, how to do a better job of managing their animals so that they don't get screwworm or they detect screwworm right away, treatment of wounds and having the supplies and available, better field surveillance, and better, and then the agencies themselves having a better lab capacity for these flies. So we think that one of the reasons why, or the main reason why, that this outbreak has happened and is spreading, is that people just don't, for years, you saw the map about how long it's been, like since, like Guatemala hasn't seen a screwworm since 93, 94. And we have a whole generation out there that's never experienced screwworm. So people were moving their animals around and they knew they were sick, but they had no idea with what. When you pair that with these critical factors, the weather being perfect for screwworm dispersal, and more cattle and livestock on the land, and people moving them around, sometimes legally and sometimes illegally. And then humans moving around can also move around screwworm. There's these factors that you have to take into consideration, that this is not an easy thing to work with. However, International Services is doing an amazing job working with our Central American partners in animal and public health, and really getting down to who are our stakeholders, who do we need to educate, and really doing a good job of working with those folks in Central America and Mexico. So Mexico's response to detections, because we focus now on Mexico because, well, Mexico is our neighbor. And what happens if it breaches Mexico? Well, then we have to deal with it here in the United States. And so what is Mexico doing? They've got 3 checkpoints right now. So it's a stop. They have to stop there and unload all of their animals. And then the animals are treated with a larvicide. They're injected with ivermectin. If fresh wounds are identified, they treat them. They take samples. And they're actually going to start putting in more checkpoints at this point as things have moved forward, and they're going to start hiring more veterinarians to do some more on-farm surveillance. Now, when Mexico became positive, we had to do, and I'm going to transition now a little bit to our domestic response. We had to do something to safeguard American agriculture. So when that positive first happened, we shut down the border for imports from Mexico. Now, we really only import cattle from Mexico, and horses. What we did is we worked, while we'd been working for a while before that proactively to have an import protocol. And then when it actually happened, we worked with the Mexican government to be sure that we had everything in place so that we could safely import animals again. Here's an idea of what's going on. So we've got 3 checks on the Mexican side before crossing. 2 of those are with the Mexican officials before we get to the US officials. And what happens is that 3 to 5 days before export, they get an ivermectin treatment, they get an exam. 24 hours pre-export, they get another exam. And that's all done by the Mexican officials. And then they get an exam with our staff right before crossing. So all on the Mexican side. And on top of that, they get treated with another pesticide. They get dipped. And that helps. That's traditionally, we use that for cattle fever ticks. but it also helps with the screwworm on top of that. At any point in this process, if that animal has a wound, it doesn't have to be infested. Any wound, they're sent back, the entire lot is sent back to the herd of origin. So this is working, you guys. I'm happy to say that we're not crossing as many animals as we did. Well, I'm not happy about that. We're crossing fewer animals, but this protocol works so far. Mexico is actually finding animals that have not infestations, but wounds because of ear tags. And those animals are never even getting to our inspection. They're being turned around before they ever get to the border. So again, there's fewer animals coming across, but this protocol is working to keep animals with wounds and potential infestations off the border. Now, the horses are a little different. We actually had import quarantine stations for these horses for other reasons before this happened. So they are treated pre-export and examined, and they're given a treatment examination at the import quarantine facility. They're actually sedated and given an entire examination there because of the horses tend to have screwworm infestations, the male horses, actually in their genitalia. And so they have to be sedated in order to check it. We're also seeing our dog imports, really, this is for any country that historically has had screwworm. We want to see a health certificate that says that they've been inspected within 5 days and that they're free of screwworm, or if they did have screwworm at some point, they've been treated with what, and now they no longer have screwworm. So, all right, I think I might see screwworm. What do I do? All right, if you think you have screwworm on or in one of your animals, it's important to talk to your veterinarian. That's the main person you need to contact. You want to seek treatment for your animal as soon as possible. You don't want to move that animal around except to get to the veterinarian. Keep it in a safe, contained space. An area that, if you have an area that is easy to spray down, wipe down afterwards, that would be a best spot to keep them. If anything drops from the animal, or then go ahead and just throw it in some rubbing alcohol and keep it, take it with you to the veterinarian, take some photos if you can. You can't get screwworm from your animal, but if you're handling your animal, you want to maybe wear gloves, because again, I talked to you about those bacterial infections in the wounds. You could get a bacterial infection. We don't want you to do that. So wear gloves if you're going to handle your animals. As I mentioned, screwworm also infests humans. So these next few slides are actually from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And they advise that if you definitely keep in mind that if you've gone to some of these areas, that you could get screwworm yourself. Painful lesions, sensation of movement, bad smelling discharge, you could see larvae, and you can get a secondary bacterial infection. This photo here, this big one, is another type of myiasis you can get, which is called a human bot fly. And you see it's much larger, and there's just one in that situation. So you'll see one. Screwworm doesn't act that way. You'll see multiple in the wound. If you think you got screwworm, go to your doctor immediately. If you see maggots, put them in alcohol. Do not throw them in the trash. We're infesting the environment that way. We have no way to track that. And then we're going to have to do a huge investigation to figure out if there's screwworm in the area. Remind your healthcare provider to report your case. Same thing with the animals. Remind your healthcare provider, your vet, to report any cases. They are bound by law to report these cases. Here's some more public health information for you that you can scan and find out more information about public health on so screwworm in humans. And how to prevent screwworm. And this goes pretty much for you and your animals. So if you've got a skin wound, you know, especially if you're in one of these areas, keep them clean and covered. You can wear loose fitting long sleeve shirts and long pants and socks to keep the flies off of your skin. Use insect repellent. Treat your clothing and gear with permethrin. And it's important to note that when you use permethrin on your clothing and gear, you need to do that before you wear the clothing. So if you think, and it'll last a few washes, you don't ever put permethrin on your clothing or gear while you're wearing it. It needs to dry before you put those clothes on. Sleep indoors or in rooms with screens. We've seen some of these human cases come into the US that they think that they've gotten infested because they fell asleep on the beach. That's the bottom line, is that you don't have to be immunocompromised, but some of these many folks are, and they just were in the wrong place at the wrong time, taking a nap. So here's some outreach materials for you guys to look at, disseminate. This is our new screwworm webpage. And again, this is the QR code to get there. If you are not tech savvy, here's how you use this. Basically, you take your smartphone, you turn on your camera, you hover over that QR code, and you'll get a little pop-up. And then you click on the pop-up and it'll take you to the web page. Very easy. On this page, this is just scrolling down the page, we have that economic analysis that I mentioned earlier where I showed you the graph. Here in this block, we've got outbreak information on our Central American outbreak, including different types of maps and videos. And then here on how to prevent this disease, we've got some of the dog entry requirements there, how it is treated. We've got CDC fact sheet links. We also have some of the labeled pesticides here in the United States for screwworm. This is our fact sheet. We've got this in English and Spanish. It's easily downloadable and printable. This is our brochure. And if you're with an agency and you would like any of these, you can definitely email me. Our legislative and public affairs will print these for you for a cost and send them to you. But, and it'll be a nice, beautiful brochure you can hand out at fairs and to stakeholders. So, if you just want more information, this is one of the places you can go and see kind of what the situation is. And we've got more resources, and we're going to continue to have more resources as we build forward, because just before I forget, let me tell you a little bit about why we started building out this page so much. We're getting ready for a domestic response in case we really need to respond. We hope that we don't, but in case we need to, communication is going to be key. And we'll continue to put more and more resources on this page, like our pest alert and our brochure, and then the reporting links in order to be able to find your veterinarians or your APHIS officials or your state animal health officials or whatever you need. But we're also spending a lot of time these days training our staff, showing them the things that you're seeing today, teaching them how to release flies, teaching them how to put traps up to find flies, how to detect flies in maggots in animals and how to treat that. And we're stockpiling treatments and doing everything we can so that the day that we see screwworm here on the US soil, we will be able to respond and potentially eradicate that population of screwworms. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention this morning. I put this is our screwworm jar at our National Veterinary Services lab. I put this here because I just want you guys to know that we're not new in the screwworm game. Again, we have historically had screwworm. And so our entomology and identifiers have seen a few screwworms. This is our jar here. And we're ready to respond. So if you have any questions, here's my contact. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Denise. That was really informative. We do have one question. If you would actually go back and show the QR code for that information, that website that you showed, if you would reshare that.
Yes, hold on one second.
Great.
This QR code will get you to everything that I showed you today in the outreach material.
Great. Thank you so much. And then we have another question. Will there be any efforts to try to push the current infestation in Central America back, or will there be a new line of defense?
Yes, so when I was talking about the fly release grids and the Isthmus of Mexico, that is what they're trying to make our new barrier zone. That is where all the flies are going right now. So the idea is keep the cases south of that. And as we indeed see through surveillance that there's fewer cases, that we continue to move that grid south so that we push it right back down to where it was before, which is the border of Colombia. If indeed we see cases above that zone, we'll have to push that grid, that fly grid north.
Thank you. And what do adults eat? What is the trademark to identify them?
Yeah, so adults really don't eat. They really are, they drink liquids basically. And so they're gonna need sugar, water. And so one of the ways that we do surveillance is actually what we call our rotten liver surveillance. And we put out trays of rotten liver and they smell the rotten liver and the flies come in, and we actually look at the different flies and catch what we think are screwworms, pull them out of the net. And it's a way for us to detect screwworm in an area and see if indeed the sterile release is working correctly. We have ways to tell the difference between wild flies and the sterile flies. So one of the ways, and I showed you a lot of pictures of the adults, that's what the adults look like. They're usually green and or blue metallic flies about the size of a housefly. And they've got stripes on their back and red eyes. And so they do look like other flies, other blowflies that are out there. So, you know, we don't want you to get caught up in trying to figure out if you have adult screwworms in your yard. It's difficult to tell the difference. But if you were to ever worry about that, you could always take a photo and we'll get an identifier to at least look at your photo.
Next we have, are there any predators? Do they have any predators in their native range?
Yeah, so flies are such that they have a lot of predators. So when you think about flies, you've got birds that eat flies, you've got different types of reptiles and you know, amphibians and some mammals that will eat flies. So however, if you're going towards biocontrol of things eating the flies, that's not something really that we're going to be able to do. And they're just really good at moving around. However, when there are high numbers of hosts, they tend not to move a lot. But if they don't have hosts available, we saw one fly when we did our release in the Keys. We saw it fly actually 15 miles in the Everglades, actually, because there weren't a lot of perfect hosts for it. So it kept going. So they do fly they do fly, but they don't like to fly over large expanses of water. Other animals eating the flies hasn't really shown us a whole lot of good in controlling them.
Okay, and I think our last question, can you provide voucher specimens to local labs so we can train staff to recognize the maggots?
So that's something you should email me about. Honestly, maggot identification is really difficult. So what we ask people to do is either, if you have maggots that need to be identified, we ask you either, if it's a human, if it comes from a human, we ask that they go to the CDC. And if you would like an ID from an animal, we ask that those will go to our National Veterinary Services labs. And I can give you that information if you want to email me as to how to do that.
Great, and actually we just got one more. Do rodents get infested by NWS?
Yes. Yeah, all warm-blooded animals.
Got it. Okay, I think that concludes our Q&A. Thank you again so much for your time and your expertise. That was a great presentation and we really appreciate it. We are going to close out this session with our call to action for the day. We like to close out these information sharing sessions with a call to action, and this one is to send a letter to your federal representatives in the House and Senate asking to reauthorize a complete farm bill. The 2018 Farm Bill has been extended through September 30th of this year, but it's missing many of the original key provisions for invasive species management that were present in its original form. So make sure that you ask our legislators to create and pass a fully funded 5-year farm bill as it was intended. You can scan that QR code or follow the link in the chat, input your information, and it'll send a letter that we have prepared for you to your representatives. All right, and last, we have just a couple more webinars to close out this week of NISAW. You can go to nisaw.org and register for those. We hope to see you there. And thank you all for attending the session, and thank you again to our speaker.